In this organization, managers suspect office romance between two chummy coworkers, a team member, dun dun dun, and her boss. They always go to lunch and disappear for long periods of time. So I'm assuming that they're not remote, but who knows? The company has no proof, but isn't sure what to do. They don't want to allow it, but also don't have a written policy. Help! What do I do? Okay, Summer, this sounds intense, complicated, and many layers. So I'll let you go first on unpacking this scenario.
Well, there's definitely quite a bit to talk about here. And, I always take the perspective of if I was talking to this caller on the phone, what are some of the questions or the considerations that we should be thinking about as we tackle this topic? And one of the things that I always do is try to help see the different angles of what could potentially be going on, right? Because we know in HR, Joey, not everything is as it might appear or seem. Sometimes it is, but assuming in HR can get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So I think, the first thing that I would ask is, there's no proof per se, but what is it beyond, what's been initially shared that has prompted this concern? And try to understand, is this a concern that's coming from one person? Is it multiple people? And what's prompting it? Because there's often something else there. It maybe isn't just, well, these two people are taking lunch together. Maybe it's, are they disappearing for long, long, long periods of time, and so people are feeling like they're not pulling their weight. I know they mentioned that it was a team member and her boss. So, of course, there is the potential concern that if there is something going on, that there's definitely reason for concern about, a team member either being favored or perceived as being favored. So I definitely think there's a lot of questions to be asking in this regard. But I think on the flip side, Joey, you don't know, are these team members, are they going off to actually work on projects? Like, is that their meeting? They have lunch and it's their, regular check-in and they work through projects. So, I mean, I think there's just not enough here to know truly what's going on. But I think the first order of business is finding out more information before we can, before we can determine next steps. But what do you think?
No, I agree. I think it's important to ask more questions and have more than have a solution at this point because, as you mentioned, there's so many what ifs that could be at play here. Now, if I think about the worst case scenario, what ifs, right? You mentioned that this is potentially a person, and you mentioned her boss. So, anytime there is a power dynamic involved of supervisor and supervisee, that sort of escalates the risk magnitude if it came down to maybe a future perceived sexual harassment issue or a domestic violence or anything of that nature that could play out if this went south or if this was even unintended, because we don't know if this boss is like a quid pro quo, come with me to lunch and or else, right? So I would definitely ask more questions than answers, but I wouldn't go full on like, "Hey, are you all dating?" Because I'd imagine if somebody asked me that, I'd probably clam up immediately, whether it was true or not. I'd probably jump on the defensive. But just the first thing I would do is map out like, well, what are the worst case scenarios that we may be looking at here if this were true, and then try to plan for those. The other thing I might consider doing is definitely meeting with them individually to sort of see, hey, you know, uh, how are things going with working with so and so? And you're not asking directly, like, are you dating? but you're just getting a feel for what that professional relationship is looking like. And you may get to a point where, again, I guess I should put a disclaimer. We are not giving prescriptive advice. We are just talking. So don't do this. And then if it backfires, don't sue us. But we're just chatting. But you might, after you ask a couple questions, get to the point where it says, well, people are. It has come to our attention that people are concerned when you and so go out for lunch or go away, that you're unreachable, unaccessible for long periods of time. Um, can you speak to that and just give them an opportunity to respond? But the other piece of this is, and I'll end here, is that there's no written policy. So you can't just automatically put a law into place or say you can't do this unless you back it up with writing. So a written policy, some things I might include are if supervisors and subordinates can date. If so, at what point do you need to disclose that to HR? If not, what would it look like to maybe potentially have a job transfer where someone's removed from under the supervision of some person to another, and just help mitigate the risk, not only for the organization, but for the individuals that, like, if it doesn't work out, what would be the risk if they had to then continue to be working partners? And what would that mean for their relationship and for their team? Summer, any thoughts?
I think that's excellent advice, Joey. And it is that written policy, if it doesn't exist, that I think is going to be really the key to being able to manage this on a go forward basis, because we love policies. We help companies write them because it does allow them to better manage expectations of their team. And then also they have something to go by, to enforce if they need to with their team. And I think the last part that I wanted to add to this, as I was kind of thinking about the approach, I also think there may be a potential, depending on the relationship that the boss in this scenario has with their manager. Because I think about conversations that some of my mentors and leaders have had with me growing, kind of moving up in my HR career. And, when you have somebody who's truly looking out for your best interests, they can often share feedback with you that maybe not others are comfortable doing. So I feel like, if appropriate, that the boss in this situation could potentially be on the receiving end of a conversation from their manager to just say, hey, I don't want this to be awkward, but, I need to bring it to your attention that, some team members have, raised some concerns that, there may be something going on with one of your, with one of your subordinates. And, we want to make sure that we're promoting a culture that um, is promoting that there is no actual or perceived favoritism, and that everybody has the same opportunities and are treated fairly. So whether there is or isn't something going on, we need to ensure that if there isn't, that there's no perception that there is, and if there is, and we need to kind of talk about what that looks like in terms of navigating it within the organization. And I'm not sure if you mentioned it already, Joey, but typically what that would look like if a relationship is confirmed, that either the team member or the boss, if there's another opportunity for them to move in a non-reporting relationship, that's the best outcome. But if not, sometimes it means that one or the other would need to exit the organization because they just can't permit that type of reporting relationship to occur.